For Seasons at Willow Cottage by Enchanted Tales Hub, Volume 1, Spring, March 21st, Willow Cottage, first morning. The snow has finally melted, leaving the garden looking like a wrinkled quilt, brown, damp, and soft underfoot. I arrived last night just as the rain stopped. The cottage was cold and smelled like closed-up wood and old lavender, but I lit a fire and unpacked the kettle first. Some things you do instinctively, even in a place you've never lived. This morning, I woke up to the sound of dripping water, not from a leaky roof, thankfully, but from the mossy eaves. The trees out front, old willows, maybe older than the cottage itself, are beginning to bud, though shyly. A robin pecked at my window as I brewed tea. It felt like a greeting. Inside, everything is quiet. No city horns, no apartment buzzers. Just the faint ticking of the wall clock and the creaking of the cottage settling back into life, like it's stretching its limbs after a long nap. I don't know exactly what I'm looking for here. Maybe nothing, maybe space, maybe stillness. My sketchbook sits on the table, untouched since last December, but I didn't bring it out of guilt. I brought it like one brings an old friend, not expecting conversation, just company. I made a pot of rosemary and lemon peel tea, an old recipe I scribbled years ago in the margins of a notebook. Recipe of rosemary and lemon peel tea for rainy mornings and quiet thoughts. 1 sprig of fresh rosemary, or 1 teaspoon dried, peel of half an unwaxed lemon, 1 teaspoon honey, optional, boil water and steep for 5 to 7 minutes. Breathe in the scent before you sip. The tea is slightly bitter but warming. It feels like something that reminds the bones to wake up. Later, I'll walk down to the orchard. It's not mine, but I've been told the trees bloom wildly in spring, even if neglected. I like the idea of that. March 24th. The orchard path. It rained again last night, the kind that barely makes a sound, more like a hush falling over the roof than a storm. The world feels rinsed this morning. Clean. Shiny in the way wet leaves get, catching little flashes of light as they sway. I finally walked down to the orchard today. I wasn't planning to, not yet, but something about the breeze felt like a nudge. So I tied my scarf, grabbed a small sketchbook, and followed the path lined with mossy stones and last year's fallen twigs. The orchard is wilder than I expected, not rows and rows of tidy trees, but a loose tangle of old trunks and spring grass. Some of the branches still look winter-weary, but the buds are coming. Tiny, stubborn promises. There's one particular tree at the far end, leaning sideways like it's listening. Its bark is split in places, and a small hollow in its side was filled with rainwater and a single floating petal, a delicate pink, like something whispered. I sat there for a while and sketched the tree. Nothing elaborate, just lines to remember the feeling. A crow watched me from a fence post, almost politely. On my way back, I picked up a few wild herbs I recognized: nettle, dandelion, and chickweed. Enough to make a small green soup, the kind that tastes like early spring and slightly stings your tongue. Recipe: first forager's soup. light green, slightly wild. One small handful young nettle leaves, use gloves, one handful dandelion greens, a few strands of chickweed, one half-chopped onion, one clove garlic, 1 teaspoon butter or olive oil, salt and pepper to taste. Sauté onion and garlic in butter. Add greens and water or light broth and simmer until soft. Blend smooth. Add a splash of lemon juice if you like. Tomorrow I might try pressing some leaves. Or maybe do nothing at all. That feels like an option here, to simply exist. March 28th. Rain bread and quiet words. It's the kind of day where the clouds hang so low they seem to press gently against the roof. Rain began at dawn and hasn't stopped since, not fierce, just steady, like a whispering presence you can't quite ignore. I didn't go out today. Instead, I lit a candle and stayed in the kitchen wearing wool socks and moving slowly. I baked a small loaf of rosemary bread. The scent filled the whole cottage, warm and piney, like something from memory. The silence here is never quite empty. The wood creaks when it shifts. The stove hums faintly. Somewhere, a drip taps rhythmically into a tin pail outside. These sounds are becoming familiar, friendly. While the dough was rising, I opened my old tin box of letters. Most are from years ago, postcards from friends, scraps with recipes, a pressed flower I can't name. Tucked underneath them all was an unsent letter I wrote to my mother months after she passed. I had forgotten it was there. I didn't read it, not yet. Just held it in my hands for a while. When the bread was ready, I ate it warm with butter and a little sea salt, standing at the window as the rain darkened the stone path. Everything outside looked painted, like the world had been softened at the edges. Recipe, rain bread, small rosemary loaf. Soft inside, golden crust, best eaten warm. 1.5 cups flour, half a teaspoon salt, 1 teaspoon sugar, 1 teaspoon dried yeast, 3/4 cup warm water, 1 tablespoon olive oil, 1 teaspoon dried rosemary or chopped fresh. Mix dry ingredients. Add water and oil. Knead until soft and elastic. Let rise in a warm spot for 1 to 2 hours. Shape into a round loaf. Sprinkle with rosemary and bake at 200 degrees Celsius, 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes. Serve warm with butter and silence. Maybe tomorrow I'll walk down to the river. Or maybe I'll finally finish that unsent letter. But for today, warm bread and a little quiet were enough. April 1st. A visitor with eggs. I heard the knock before I saw her. 3 soft taps on the blue door. Not urgent, just enough to stir the air. It was Mrs. Alderwood from the house beyond the hedgerow. We'd only met once, briefly, when I arrived. She was holding a basket wrapped in a tea towel, steam rising faintly from it like breath in cold air. "Still warm," she said, handing it to me. From my hens. Inside, 6 pale brown eggs, each one slightly different, speckled and imperfect and beautiful in their way. There was also a small jar of golden marmalade tied with twine, no label. I offered her tea, and she accepted, the polite kind of acceptance, more for company than thirst. We sat at the kitchen table while the rain softened the windows. She spoke mostly of her garden, how the snow peas were coming late this year, how the foxes had returned early. I listened, nodding, not needing to add much. Her voice was like old linen, worn but warm. Before she left, she pointed at the bookshelf near the fireplace. "That one there," she said. "Third from the right. My sister wrote it ages ago." I pulled it down after she left. Herb lore of the quiet South. Inside were notes in pencil, small pressed violets between the pages, and a recipe for something called April posset. I might try it tomorrow. For now, I've placed the eggs in a little ceramic bowl by the window. They catch the light like small lanterns. No recipe today, just a gift. Sometimes nourishment comes in the form of kindness, and that is enough. Tomorrow, I'll write her a note in return. Maybe I'll tuck in a tiny sketch. A thank you not in words, but in lines and light. April 5th. The first seeds. This morning the sun came through the curtains before I was even awake. Soft light, gold and full of promise, pulling on the floorboards like a cat curled up to nap. It felt like the right kind of day to begin something. So I opened the garden shed for the first time. The hinges creaked in protest, and the smell inside was half-forgotten summers, soil, rust, and lavender soap someone must have left behind. I found a little trowel with a blue-painted handle, flaking now. It fit perfectly in my hand. On the kitchen table, I'd been keeping a few packets of seeds: radish, lettuce, calendula, chamomile. Nothing ambitious, just the kind of things that make a meal feel fresh or a cup of tea feel thoughtful. The ground was soft from the recent rain. I cleared a small patch near the back steps where the sun lingers longest. As I planted each seed, I whispered their names under my breath like spells: radish, lettuce, calendula, chamomile. Like they needed to hear their own names to remember how to grow. A blackbird landed on the garden wall and watched me work. Maybe I imagined it, but it felt like she nodded once before flying off. Afterward, I washed the dirt from my hands and made a sandwich with the last of the rosemary bread and Mrs. Alderwood's marmalade. It was sweet and strange, like citrus and something floral, almost like memory. Notes from the garden table. The soil is darker than I expected. Earthworms equals a good sign. I forgot how grounding it feels to touch dirt. I hope the calendula comes up first. I've missed color. It's odd. I haven't spoken to anyone since Mrs. Alderwood came, but I don't feel lonely. The garden speaks in gestures. The wind in the grass, the bird on the wall, the hush when I listen. Maybe everything is a kind of conversation if you're quiet enough to hear it. April 9th. Petals and pages. The sun only stayed for a day or two. Today the sky was cloudy again, but not cold, just soft and undecided, like it couldn't choose between gray and blue. After breakfast, I wandered to the edge of the orchard, where the wildflowers are starting to come up. Nothing dramatic, just little things. Violets, creeping speedwell, a few star-shaped stitchworts. All low to the ground, blinking up at the sky as if to say, "Is it time yet?" I brought a small basket and picked a few, just one of each, carefully. I read somewhere that you should never take more than you need or more than the bees can spare. Back at the cottage, I opened an old book to press them in, a battered atlas with pages softened by time. I liked the idea of wildflowers resting inside maps, as though they might find their way somewhere, even after they've faded. Each one I laid flat between parchment paper, then stacked them between the heavy pages, labeling them in pencil like a botanist pretending not to be sentimental. There's something reverent about the process. You don't just preserve a flower, you preserve the moment you found it. The wind, the quiet, the feeling in your chest that something small had just spoken to you. Flower notes, April 9th. Violet sweet and bright like a nod, speedwell, blue like river glass, stitchwort, fragile, a star that fell into grass. I'll check on them in a week or two. Maybe I'll press them into a letter or use them to mark the pages of books I love. It's nice to think of beauty tucked between words. April 13th. The Forgotten Path. It began with a breeze, the kind that stirs petals off branches and carries them in little spirals across the grass. I was walking near the orchard, basket in hand, when I noticed a patch of earth that looked different, not freshly disturbed, but worn, like it used to be a path long ago. The grass was thinner there. Moss-covered stones peeked through like crumbs from an old story. I hesitated, then followed. It curved gently, half lost to brambles and shade, weaving behind the orchard and into a little pocket of trees. Everything felt quieter there, like even the birds were holding their breath. My boots crunched over last year's leaves. The air smelled of green things just waking. After a few minutes, the path opened into a tiny glade, circular, ringed by silver birches and a crumbling bench, nearly swallowed by ivy. At its center, an old iron sundial, rusted but still standing. I brushed away the moss with my sleeve. No markings remained, time itself had faded. But the shape of it, the way the sunlight touched it through the trees, it felt like the kind of place someone once waited for something or someone. I sat for a while, said nothing, let the wind write its own thoughts through the branches. Things I noticed in the clearing. A heart carved into a birch trunk, nearly worn away, 2 snail shells, side by side, a perfect circle of moss under the bench, something that smelled like wild thyme but wasn't. I think I'll return with a sketchbook tomorrow. There's a kind of silence in that place that deserves to be remembered. Or maybe it remembers me. April 18th, down to the river. I woke to birdsong louder than before. The kind of chirping that feels layered, overlapping a whole conversation woven through the hedges. Spring is no longer arriving. It's here, full-bodied and blooming. It felt like a river day. I packed a small lunch, bread, apple slices, and a wedge of soft cheese, and followed the trail past the orchard, past the forgotten glade, until I heard it. The sound always reaches you before the sight, low, rushing, constant, like breath drawn in and never quite let out. The river here isn't wide, but it moves with purpose. Pebbled and clear, it flickers in the light, blues, browns, flashes of silver. I found a mossy rock near the bend and sat barefoot, feet just above the water. I watched minnows dart between shadows, water skaters drawing invisible shapes across the surface. Every so often, a leaf would float by, caught up in the current. I wondered where it would end up. Far from here, probably. Or maybe just caught on a branch around the bend. While I ate, I wrote a few lines in my notebook. Not quite a poem. Just words the river gave me. Maybe that's all writing is, sometimes. Listening carefully enough to echo something back. River Notes, April 18th. Sound, constant but kind, like being shushed lovingly. Smell, green, clear, cold stone. A dragonfly landed on my knee. Stayed a full breath. One perfect skipping stone. I didn't throw it. I kept it. I may return tomorrow with a small jar to collect some river stones, or maybe just the memory of light on water. I think I'm beginning to feel rooted here. Like the river, I don't need to stay still. I just need to keep moving gently. April 24th. A letter without a stamp. I nearly missed it. The wind had blown open the bottom half of the screen door, and when I went to close it, something caught my eye, a folded piece of paper tucked just inside the door frame. No envelope, no stamp, just a piece of cream-colored paper, creased and thumbed, like it had traveled in someone's coat pocket for a while before arriving here. The handwriting was neat in black ink. Unfamiliar. I used to walk past this cottage every spring. There were lilacs once by the gate. I hope you'll plant them again. Just someone who remembers. That was all. No name, no address, nothing else. I stood holding it for longer than I needed to. The paper felt warm, as if it had soaked in the sunlight while waiting for me. There are no lilacs here now. Not yet. But I spent the afternoon sketching out where I might plant some. Along the fence, perhaps, where the morning light falls softest. I think the soil there would like lilacs. It's strange, isn't it? How someone who doesn't sign their name can still make you feel seen. Letter Notes, April 24th. The handwriting had a looped L, slight left slant. Ink had bled slightly on one side, maybe rain? Or a shaky hand. No scent. No initials. Just memory. I tucked the letter into the back of my journal. Not for safekeeping, really, more like planting a seed. I think tomorrow I'll walk into town. Maybe buy lilac saplings. Or maybe just tea. Either way, I'll keep an eye out for anyone who looks like they remember this place. April 28th. The cupboard afternoon. Today felt like a day meant for small things. The sky was drowsy and pale, the kind of gray that doesn't promise rain but doesn't rule it out either. I stayed inside and let the kettle hum more than once. I ended up cleaning the tall pine cupboard in the corner of the kitchen, the one with the glass doors that catches the morning light. I'd meant to for weeks, but always found some excuse to leave it untouched. It felt like it belonged to someone else. Maybe today I was finally ready to make it mine. Inside, I found a stack of old saucers I hadn't noticed before, painted with faded violets and edged in gold. One had a crack running through it, carefully mended with something that looked like tree sap and patience. I kept them all. I lined the shelves with torn brown paper and rearranged my things. Jam jars, tea tins, my grandmother's sugar spoon. A tiny ceramic fox I found at the second-hand shop last month. I didn't realize how comforting it was to place objects in their right place, to make room and give names to stillness. I listened to the rain come in soft around mid-afternoon, tapping against the windows like someone rehearsing a lullaby. Domestic notes, April 28th. Washed and polished 6 cups. Kept 5. One now holds wildflowers. Rearranged jars by color, then again by use. Settled on instinct. Lit a candle that smells of vanilla and something woody, like driftwood soaked in milk. There was no grand moment. No visitor, no letter, no revelation. Just the rhythm of being here. And that, I think, is sometimes the most important kind of day. May 3rd, baking day. I woke early today to a light so soft it felt like it had been stirred into the sky with cream. The birds were already busy outside the window, and the air smelled of wet leaves and distant blossoms. There was no reason to bake, no occasion, no guests coming, but something in me wanted to fill the cottage with that kind of warmth. The kind that rises from the oven and drapes itself over everything like a quilt. I tied on the old linen apron I found in the bottom drawer last week. It still had flour in the pockets, like someone once forgot their hands while making bread. I decided on lemon thyme tea cake. The thyme was just beginning to green near the kitchen steps, and I thought it deserved to be tasted, not just noticed. The recipe was a mix of memory and guesswork. I didn't follow a book, just my hands and what the morning asked for. The cottage filled with a scent I couldn't quite describe, not just lemon or herb, but home. I sat at the table with a slice still warm, steam rising from my tea, rain beginning again, just as I finished the first bite. Recipe lemon thyme tea cake. Ingredients: 1 cup flour, half a cup sugar, zest of 1 lemon, 1/2 teaspoon baking powder, pinch of salt, half a cup butter, melted, 2 eggs, juice of half a lemon, 2 tablespoons fresh thyme leaves, finely chopped, optional. A light glaze of lemon and honey. Method: preheat oven to 180 degrees Celsius, 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Mix dry ingredients in one bowl, wet in another. Combine gently. Pour into a lined loaf tin. Bake 35 to 40 minutes or until golden and a toothpick comes out clean. Let cool slightly before slicing. Best served with soft rain and a mug of tea. There's something sacred in baking for no one but yourself. Like saying, you are worth the good things even when no one's watching. I might wrap a few slices and leave them by the post office tomorrow. There's more than enough to share. May 7th, market morning. The town market is only open on Thursdays and Sundays. I prefer Thursdays, fewer people, more chance of finding something unexpected. I left just after sunrise, basket on my arm, scarf wrapped loosely around my neck. The air was cool and smelled faintly of lilac and something warm, maybe someone already baking bread. The market sets up near the old stone fountain, under trees that are finally in leaf. Birds were darting between the awnings, bold and unbothered by the hum of early conversation. I wandered slowly, letting myself be drawn by scent and color. Ruby red radishes with their leafy tops still dewy, duck eggs stacked like pebbles in straw, bundles of fresh herbs tied with twine. At one stall, a woman was selling honey in glass jars the color of amber. She told me the bees had been visiting wild plum blossoms. I bought one and asked for her favorite way to eat it. On buttered toast with thin slices of pear, she said. I liked her answer enough to buy two. Further along, I found an old man selling second-hand books out of wooden crates. I picked up a worn paperback with a pressed clover inside. He saw me smile and said, "That one's meant to be yours." It felt like it. Market Treasures, May 7th. Wild plum blossom honey, 2 duck eggs, 1 pale blue, a bundle of rosemary and marjoram, a linen napkin embroidered with forget-me-nots, a book of short stories with a clover between pages 46 and 47. When I returned, I made tea and toast with butter and honey, just like she said. The pear was soft, almost floral. Sometimes a morning like this feels like a love letter from the world. Quiet, folded neatly, waiting to be opened with both hands. May 10th. The night the lights went out. The rain began around dusk, slow at first, then sudden and full, like someone tipped over the sky. I was reading by the window, the book from the market with the pressed clover, when the power flickered once, twice, and gave up. Just like that, the cottage went still. No hum from the fridge, no clock ticking, just the sound of rain filling the silence like water in a cup. I didn't panic. I lit a candle, then another, then one more for good measure. The cottage looked like a storybook scene, golden pools of light glowing against wood and stone, shadows softening the edges of everything. I made tea the old way, boiled water on the iron stove, stirred and dried mint from the jar. It tasted stronger in the quiet. I wrapped myself in the blanket from the back of the couch, the one that smells like cedar and old summers, and watched the storm. Thunder rolled distantly, like a conversation happening in another room. The rain drummed on the roof, relentless and rhythmic. I thought of the garden, the river, the path to the sundial, all soaked and shimmering in darkness. And I thought of the letter. Something about the storm made me want to read it again, as if it might mean something new in candlelight. Storm Notes, May 10th. Found one candle I didn't know I had in the cupboard behind the apricot jam. The flicker made the ceramic fox look alive for a moment. The letter felt heavier tonight, though I know that's impossible. Power returned at 2:17 a.m., but I was already asleep on the couch. There's something about storms that reminds you what truly fills a house. Not lights, not sound, just you and how you choose to sit with the dark. May 14th. The lilacs are here. I stepped outside this morning with my tea, and the scent met me before anything else. Soft, sweet, unmistakable. The lilacs have bloomed. Not the ones I planted, not yet, but the old, forgotten bush near the side gate. I hadn't noticed it before. It's tucked behind ivy and a tangle of hedge. But today it called to me, bold and fragrant. A cascade of lavender blooms, some as tall as my forearm. Like the bush had been quietly waiting all these years for someone to notice again. I stood there for a long while, mug in hand, the steam mixing with the scent of lilac. I couldn't help but think of the letter, the one tucked in the back of my journal. There were lilacs once by the gate, and now, as if by wish or memory, they've returned. I trimmed just a few stems, gently, carefully, and brought them inside. They filled the entire cottage with the scent of something ancient and alive. I placed one branch in a tall jar by the kitchen window, another in a tiny green vase beside my bed. Everything feels different with lilacs blooming, like the house is remembering itself. Lilac notes, May 14th. Pale violet, almost gray in shade, four-petaled and fragrant beyond belief. The branch curved slightly, as if bowing. I whispered thank you to the bush when I left. I didn't do anything else today. No cleaning, no baking. I let the house be full of lilac and light. Sometimes that's enough. May 18th. First harvest. It wasn't meant to be a harvesting day. I went out to pull weeds from the vegetable beds, but the parsley had grown wild and bushy. The radishes had begun to show their red shoulders above the soil, and the calendula, bless it, had opened into a sea of gold and orange. So I fetched my basket. There's something deeply reassuring about gathering what you've grown, even if it's just a handful. I tugged up the radishes one by one, their roots clinging to the earth like they weren't quite ready to leave. The calendula was humming with bees, so I waited, picked only the blooms where the bees had already moved on. They say the petals make a lovely tea or a healing salve. I haven't decided yet. Inside, I rinsed everything carefully in the old enamel sink. The parsley smelled fresh and green and alive. I made a simple herb butter, just chopped parsley, salt, and softened butter folded together in a small bowl. I spread it on warm toast and ate it standing in the kitchen with wet hands and muddy shoes. It felt like a reward. Or a promise. Harvest notes, May 18th. 6 round radishes, pink and white, 1 large handful of flat leaf parsley, 9 calendula blossoms, bright as coins, 1 snail hiding under the mint pot, relocated gently to the compost heap. The days are lengthening. There's more light now. More color, more scent. I keep thinking, this is what I came for. Not just the solitude, not just the quiet, but the enoughness of it all. Tomorrow, I'll start drying the calendula petals on paper trays by the window. And maybe I'll look up how to make that salve, just in case the world ever needs mending. May 20th. Radish toast, and calendula butter. It rained early this morning, just a soft mist that left everything glassy and green. The perfect kind of day to stay indoors and play with yesterday's harvest. The radishes sat in a bowl on the table, still streaked with a little soil at the ends. They looked too lovely to hide inside anything complicated, so I went with simplicity: toast, butter, salt, and thin slices. But then I remembered the calendula. I'd read that you could fold the petals into softened butter, not just for color, but for a hint of earthy sweetness. So I tried it. Bright golden petals stirred into a small dish of creamy butter, along with a pinch of sea salt and a whisper of lemon zest. It was like spreading sunlight. I toasted 2 slices of sourdough on the stovetop. No electricity needed today, just a heavy pan and patience. Then I layered on the calendula butter, the radish slices, and a scatter of herbs from the windowsill. When I took the first bite, I actually laughed. It was better than expected: peppery, soft, zesty, delicate. Like the garden was saying, "Yes, you're doing just fine." Recipe: radish toast with calendula butter. Ingredients: 2 slices of rustic sourdough bread, 3 to 4 fresh radishes, thinly sliced, 2 tablespoons butter, softened, 1 tablespoon fresh calendula petals, only from organic, untreated blooms, zest of 1/4 lemon, flaky sea salt, a few fresh parsley or chive sprigs, optional. Method: mix calendula petals, butter, lemon zest, and a pinch of salt. Let sit a few minutes to infuse. Toast bread until golden and crisp. Spread calendula butter generously on warm toast. Layer with radish slices. Sprinkle herbs and extra salt to taste. Serve with tea or a glass of cool water, and preferably a view of something green. It's a gift, I think, this ability to make small, good things with our hands. Nothing grand, nothing complicated, just enough. May 23rd. The long walk to nowhere in particular. I didn't plan to go far. I just wanted to stretch my legs, maybe check on the honeysuckle near the path. But the air was so mild and the light so golden soft, I kept walking. The lane beyond the cottage is edged with cow parsley now, tall, delicate clouds of white that sway even when there's no breeze. It makes the road feel like it's leading somewhere sacred. I passed the gate with the blue ribbon, still fluttering, the blackberry thicket, still green, not yet wild, and the mossy stone where I like to stop and listen. The birds were busy in the hedgerows, little trills and flickers, always half out of sight. I spotted a jay, blue like sky and shadow. A squirrel darted across the path like it had somewhere terribly important to be. I ended up by the old wooden bridge. The stream was higher than last week, laughing as it moved over stones. I sat for a while, watching the water shimmer and listening to the wind in the trees. There was no epiphany, no lost letter or magical sighting. Just stillness. A quiet hour held gently by the world. And when I finally turned to walk home, the clouds had shifted. A bit of sun slipped through, warm on my back. Walk notes, May 23rd. Wore the wrong shoes. Got muddy anyway. Didn't mind. The gate ribbon is fraying, might bring a new one next week. Saw 3 bees, 1 ladybug, and something that might have been a toad. The air smelled faintly of mint, like someone had been cooking outdoors. Sometimes the walk doesn't take you anywhere new. It just brings you back to yourself. And that's enough. May 26th. Mira came by. I heard the knock while I was trimming the mint by the back steps. Soft, but certain. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, there she was, Mira, with her backpack slung over one shoulder and rain in her curls. I hadn't seen her since last September. She smiled the same smile she always used when we were younger, half apology, half affection, and said I was in the area. Thought I'd risk it. I let her in before I even said a word. Some friendships pick up exactly where they left off, like bread dough left to rise, nothing lost, only deeper. We drank black tea with milk and honey, and she pulled out 2 pastries from a paper bag, slightly squished, but still perfect. Cardamom buns, the kind we used to get from the corner bakery near the bookshop. We didn't talk about everything, but we talked about enough: her new job, my garden, the letter I still hadn't answered. She asked how it felt, really felt, to be here on my own. I told her the truth. Most days it feels like breathing. Some days like hiding, but mostly like choosing. She said she understood. We walked to the sundial after tea. The lilacs were fading, but still fragrant. Mira tucked one bloom into her pocket. For the train, she said. She only stayed an hour, maybe less. But when she left, the cottage felt fuller somehow. Not heavy, just held. Visit notes, May 26th. Myra's laugh is exactly as I remember, like skipping stones. She wore the same navy sweater from our trip to the coast. Her pastry had more icing, but she gave me the bigger half. She said she might come again, maybe in summer. There are people who remind you who you were, and people who see who you're becoming. Mira is both. May 31st. The last light of May. This morning, the meadow was covered in silver threads. Spider silk, strung between grass blades and wildflowers, shimmering in the dawn. I stood barefoot on the back step, tea in hand, watching the mist rise over the fields. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. I didn't try to do much today. A bit of sweeping. I tied up the tomato vines. I pressed the last of the calendula petals between pages of my grandmother's old atlas, just because. There's a stillness in the cottage tonight that feels different than winter's quiet, not emptiness, but expectancy, as if the walls know something's coming. Not loud or grand, but different. I found a small bird's nest in the rosemary bush, abandoned, but perfectly built. I left it where it was. Some things are better when they're simply admired and left untouched. Tonight, before I lit the lamp, I opened every window. The air smelled of cut grass, lilac ghosts, and the slow bloom of summer. A single firefly blinked near the porch. I've kept this journal nearly every day since spring began. Pages full of small things, soft days, bits of wonder. I wasn't sure when I started if I would stay, but I did. And now? Now I think I might stay longer. Seasons End Notes. The last calendula bloom faded overnight. The first tomato flower opened today. The wind has changed direction. Warmer now and full of scent, a new journal waits, its cover blank and spine uncreased. Spring has taught me how to listen again. And summer? Well, we'll see what she brings.